Well, there is a saying, the pen is truly mightier than the sword.
And as we embark on Black History Month, a native Hoosier and scholar is hoping his latest book can inspire young people.
In it, he tells the stories of legacies, the history of notable African Americans who have yet to be celebrated in the ways they should. A native Hoosier who grew up in a public housing development on Indy's west side, David Leander Williams believes his recently released book, African Americans in Indianapolis, fills a void.
My niece came into my computer room.
He remembers the conversation with her that would be his call to action.
Uncle D, I have a project. I have to write about outstanding African American individuals or events that occurred during the 20th century. I took it by the hand and I took it down to Central Library. And I stood there we were there for about an hour looking for books that comprehensively talked about the history of African Americans in Indianapolis.
But David says there was hardly anything.
I became angry and I said, somebody should do something about this.
That somebody would be David himself.
I had to do it.
David spent years researching, compiling stories of black people in Indianapolis history. He takes the reader back to the days when Indiana was part of the Northwest Territory and a loophole that allowed some families to own slaves, profiling the cases of Polly Strong and Mary Bateman Clark, slaves in the territory who fought for their freedom.
Also the establishment of the Bethel AME Church.
A place that provided sanctuary and spiritual support to escaped slaves and freed blacks who ventured north. We hear about Henry Hart, a talented musician who played for a president and Indiana's governors. David highlights the doors opened by Indianapolis's Madam C.J. Walker, the first African-American woman self-made millionaire.
Here she was, a poor African-American lady, from the fields in her southern state, who's able to overcome adversity.
In his book, David even talks about the historical significance of his alma mater, Crispus Attucks High School.
The gentleman by the name of David Curtis Stevenson came to town. He was he later became very, very prominent in with the Ku Klux Klan. He had very, very powerful influence in local, city, state government. So he's able to convince the city fathers to create a high school specifically for African Americans. He wanted to create a high school that was doomed to fail.
But the first principal would not let that happen.
Dr. Matthias Nalcox, he was able to go around the country and hire the most outstanding scholars in the country, many of whom had master's and PhD degrees, but who could not teach in white high schools and colleges because of racism. So what he did, he brought college professors to the high school, so our education was not inferior, it was superior.
The book underscores the key players who founded and cultivated the area that became Indianapolis's black cultural epicenter in the 1920s, Indiana Avenue. David says his book is about highlighting strengths, and he's hoping history can be a healer.
I'm hoping that my book will encourage the generation X's and Z's to know that they come from a people who were hardworking, who were honorable, and who helped and loved one another. And I want them to return to the time period where we were able to love one another and not fight one another. So if I could do that, I think that my humble effort would have been fantastic.
And David's book also celebrates Black Hoosier war heroes, politicians, stellar athletes. Indiana University Press published David's book.
That's a really great story. I feel like I learned a lot just in those couple minutes. So what is next for David?
So he is actually hard at work right now. He's focusing on his next project, which will zero in on the contributions of influential African-American women at the turn of the century. So he expects to release that work next year.
Good for him.